All right, so let's look at this example altogether. So essentially, so what we need is use the approach we just expand here. Let's quickly go back here. So let's summarize. All right, so we have looked at two approach. One is value added, so that makes erase everything. Right, so we look at value added. Okay, and then we also look at total spending. And then, so in this example, so I will ask you to calculate or to understand how to calculate GDP, either by looking at the total value added or by looking at the total spending. All right, let's start with the first approach. So the total value added produced. So what are we going to look at? So first, in this economy, there are three firms: American Oil, American Steel, and American Motor. Okay. And so what will be consumed by the final consumer? It's very clear, though. So the cars, right? Car is the final goods. Okay, car is the final goods, right? So you can either look at the final goods, or alternatively, you can look at value of sorry, it's the sum of value added. So now let's look at sum of value added. Right. So by the way, actually here, so this is equivalent to like looking at the consumption or look at spending, right? Because that's what is going to purchase by the households. That's the only spending in this economy. Now, if we look at value added, so the first firm, so they use, this is their sale. So they did not use any intermediate goods. Essentially, this is coming from minerals. Value added is here. Second firm, 9,000 sale, but they used all produced by the first firm. So that's intermediate goods and the subtract. So 4,800 equal to 9,000 minus 4,200. So now third firm, same thing. So this car, but they use 9,000 steels. Okay, so then this is 12,500. Right. So now, hopefully, from this example, you understand why we look at final goods or value added. Otherwise, if you just say, for example, if you look at here, 9,000, and then you're going to count these things twice, right? And similarly, if you look at a number here, and then so you're going to count the steel twice, but steel has all, right? So if you look at these three numbers, so basically you're going to look at all three times, right? Okay, and then so the input, the other input, steel company has produced twice, right? So you're going to double and triple counting. So that's why we look at value added. Okay, and then we add these three numbers together, so get 12,500. So this is a value add. This is essentially like a product. And these two approach, spending versus to product, they equal to each other. Okay, but on top of that, so we can look at income approach. So what's the income? We just look at all income in the economy. Okay, first look at what income we have: wage, interest, rent, profit. So wage goes to labor, right? That's called L. Interest goes to capital, right? That's called K. Rent goes to land or building. That's called LN. Profit, that's essentially belongs to whoever owned the firm, right? Like I say, so eventually the firm is going to own by someone, right? So you should profit in, we call like a pie. All right. So all those things is going to what? It's going to, let me write down, it's going to exhaust the revenue. Does it make sense? Nothing will left, right? Or goes to whoever owns. So, and these things add up must equal to the market value of your sale. All right. So that's, to summarize, there are three approaches. Right. But certainly this is a simplification. No government, no import and export. Right. But we have example coming up. Now look at this more complex example. Similarly, we look at three different approach. Okay. Again, give you 1 minute to think about, and then we work together. So this is essentially the diagram we studied last lecture. So it looks very complicated, right? But just remember, so we have three approach, right? So let's start with, let's say which one is simpler. I guess perhaps the equal is complex, right? So let's look at spending. So means that we are going to look at this market. And then remember, we look at three sources of spending: C, I, G, net export. We need to identify them one by one. Start with C. C is here. Okay. G is here. I is here. Net export, give me these two numbers. Right? And then so we can add them together. Right? So let's label them. So this is C, this is G, this is I, and these two give you net export. Right? Actually, this kind of exhaust, all the arrow comes in, come out from the market for good and service, right? And if you add them together, should be simple. I believe $1,000, right? Okay, now erase. Are we good? Okay. So now we erase. Go to second approach. Okay. So product or the value added. The other one, it is both trivial and tricky. It's trivial because there's only one number. It's tricky because you need to identify this one number. Okay, and this number is not explicitly given, it's implicitly given. The number is here. It is implicitly given. Why? It's because it only tells you $1,000 goes to wage, profit, interest, rent. That's a payment to the use of resource. And this must equal to the market value of the goods. Does that make sense? Remember, this is economic, this is not accounting. In accounting, usually there's a profit, right? But in economics class, profit goes to zero. Why? Because this just goes to any resource, right? Okay, so and then, so value must equal to cost in economics. In accounting, so market value not necessarily equal to cost because you make a profit, right? These are accounting profit, but in economics, usually profit equals zero. All right, so this one solid. Inside the sense, it's trivial, but it's tricky. All right, so now erase these. Go to the third approach. Third approach is a little bit messy. It's a little bit messy. So third approach, we look at income. But of course, some students may say, okay, so why not we just look at this income? Okay, yes, you can do that. But now we are going to do a hard way to understand this. Okay. So, and particularly here, I want to emphasize a row over here and a row over here. So that's kind of the usual issue we got, right? So first, households are going to receive income of 1,000, right? So maybe use this part is better. Households receive income of 1,000, right? So this households income, okay? Households income. Government receive 150. That's government's income. Okay. And the government give households $20 of transfer. And then you can say that's part of the income of households. And sometimes some student make mistakes, says, okay, so then the total income is this number plus this number. I'm going to tell you there's a double counting. Why? It's because, okay, this 150, yes, it's government income, but it's come from here, right? So if you just add them together, it's double counting. If you really want to use this number, and then what you need to do is, government has 150. Okay, this is government income, but the household income is going to be minus 150. Right, they need to pay tax. Right? Okay. But then someone say, okay, what about this 20? And then you need to subtract this 20 and plot this 20. But it's too complex. And usually we just look at households and ignore the government tax as income. Right? So now we have 3 different approaches, give you the same number. Right? Just give me a second. So give me a second. Sorry. Okay. Now we look at another example. Okay, so there are 4 firms. Okay. And here, so the main reason I show you this example is because usually students mess up with this sales tax. Okay. And then so you need to just follow the discussion we had in the previous slides. Okay, sales tax is not income. All right. So anyway, so here, so this one, that's the only thing I want to emphasize. I leave that for you to study. So this probably is going to show up on the homework. But the main thing is, so yeah, from here, I guess what you can get is, right, from here, what you can get is by looking at the income. Okay, look at income, right? So, and then so you look at those like profit, wage, and the rent. And you cannot count the sales, right? So if you count sales as income, and this probably goes to government, then what happens? You must subtract this 4,000, right? Okay. Next one. So this to understand import and export is very simple. Okay, so A sell 1 million and B sell 50. There are only 2 countries. And then for A, the net export is 100 minus 50. Right, the net export for A. So that immediately means B has a net export of negative 50. Right, these are reciprocal. There are only 2 countries, right? So the answer is A. Okay. Question? No. Now, next one, income spent on imported goods. Is A correct? Represent income leak across national border. Why? You should, huh? Oh, no, so this leak just goes to, just leave the country. That's what this means, leak. This leak is not like a leak information. They just leave, just cross the border. So the answer A is correct, you know. It is a resource left the country. Okay. B is also correct, right? So that's how you calculate net export. C certainly is correct. So A, B, and C, right? Okay. So just a quick background. So who created this NIPA account? We call it National Income Product of Income. Okay, who created this? So the person is called Zeman Kuznets. He's a Russian-born economist. He proposed this NIPA account, and he created this NIPA account, and he helped us understand how we measuring our macroeconomy. That was a big achievement. Okay, I believe he won Nobel Prize back in 1960 or 1970. Right. So now we are going to move a slightly different sense. For the moment, what we have learned, we learn how to measuring the value of the goods and the service we produce, right? So either through look at value-added goods, or through spending, or through income. Okay. Now we are going to differentiate between real versus nominal. The reason why we want to do that is because we may want to track the quality of output. Sorry, quantity. Okay. So what that means, if we look at the nominal GDP, actually, this is what we have done so far. If we look at nominal GDP, okay, it doesn't tell you how many goods and services you produce. It only tells you the market value. Just think about a simple extreme example. If the economy only produced, say, for example, two cars, and so last year produced last year, okay, just imagine if you only produce two cars, last year you produced two cars, and this year also two cars. The only difference is last year the car price is 10K, and this year price of car is 20K. And simply we can look at the GDP, right? So then last year was 20K, and this year is 40K. But this 20K and 40K is going to give you a miss. If you only look at that number, it's going to give you a misleading view regarding to the quantity. So that's why we differentiate real versus nominal. What's the difference? Nominal is a value of all goods and service produced. And then we are going to calculate, use the price current in the year, or use the price whatever you observe in that year. So this is nominal. Now, what is real? The only difference is we are going to calculate the market value of total goods and service produced using the price of a selected base year. Or in other words, you use a fixed price. Like in this simple example, okay, you either use the price here or use price here. And then so you're going to have a better understanding or more precise measure in terms of quantity, right? So we have an example to help you understand. Look at this simple example. So let's see how we are going to calculate real GDP. Okay. Let's see. So if we actually, this was written on the slides, if we use year one price, okay, and that's we can calculate the real GDP. So how we're going to calculate it? So basically, for each year, let's take year one. Oh, by the way, so we fix the price here. Let's just highlight. Price fixed here. And then when we calculate real GDP of year one, use this number, multiply this one, this, multiply this, and add them together. Year two, we use this number, multiply this one, this number, multiply this one, add them together. So this is real GDP, okay? And actually, so this gives you a number. This is the real GDP coming from here. This is the real GDP coming from here. All right. So if you understand that, so let me erase everything and expand to the other systems. Oh, apologies. So this doesn't work. So, but what is this number? So this number is nominal. So I will write it here as nominal. How we get nominal? We use the quantities times the current price. Quantity times current price give you the nominal. But because you use year one as base year, so the nominal and real, they are equal. Now look at second year. So nominal, so use this number. Instead of multiply this one, we multiply this one. Similarly, this one, this one, we multiply this one. So that's give you 1,500. Now from this example, so that's give us, in sense, the value of calculating real GDP. Because by looking at the real GDP, we kind of just isolate the impact of price change on GDP. And then so from here, we can calculate, so the growth or change in quantity is 15% increase. But if you look at nominal, it's going to 50%. That's dramatically different. And this 50% largely coming from price change. Right? Okay, so that's the value of real GDP. We good? Okay. Now let's look at this practice question. So there's several questions use the same table. So you may want to try to play around with the number itself. So this one asks you the nominal GDP of 2011. Very simple. This number times this one. This number times this one. Right? But however, so this asks you to compare to others. But then say, for example, 2012, you use the same things. Right? 2010 is the same things. This is how you calculate nominal and you compare, right? Okay, so the correct answer is D. I leave the actual calculation for you, but here I just explain to you how you calculate. Now the same table, real GDP. But remember, so now we have a base year, and here base year is 2010. So 2011, how we do that? This number times this one. This number times this one. Okay. But now this is for 2011. Ask you to compare with 2010. 2010 So what are we going to do? Use this number times this one, this times this one. Of course, you plus, or you add them together, right? Is this clear? So again, leave the calculation for you, okay? It should be straightforward, right? So make sure you understand how we do that. And furthermore, understand why we do that. There are two questions: why we do what we do. Secondly, how you do that. All right. But in reality, it's complex. It's a little bit more complex. But the logic is same. In reality, what's going to happen is, so instead of two goods, so again, we look at the real GDP for the United States. Instead of two goods, you have 1 million goods. But then, so the logic is the same. All right. Instead of 3 years, you may have 50 years. The logic is set. Once you fix that year, and usually we have certain year used as a benchmark, as we are going to see later. Sometimes we use like a 1980. But the choice of that of the base year, it can be arbitrary. It's not very important. All right. Question? Okay. So same questions. So essentially just comparing the real GDP. Again, so once you know how to calculate real GDP, everything becomes straightforward, right? I leave that calculation for you and skip this one. So this is a real economy. Let me ask you, which year was used as base year by looking at this table? Which year? What do you think? Which year is base year? 2009, exactly. That's the correct answer. And why? It's because this year, so nominal and real are the same. But certainly, so the information is here, right? So just tell you real GDP use $2009. Actually, so in practice, so when they say use 2009 or $1980, means we use that year's price to calculate real GDP. And by construction, the year you choose as base year, the nominal and real is the same because you use the same price. Right. And then, so from here, you can see in general, there's inflation. And right now, so we have very high inflation in historical standard. Right. Okay. This just summarizes what we just discussed, except in base year, real GDP is not the same as nominal GDP. Right. Now, sometimes you have some complications. What is complications? Let's go back to the previous example, or even we look at it here. So what happens is you use 2009 as a base year, you get this number. And so why we care about real GDP? And usually we care about change in quantity. Right? So this really matters to us. That just tells you how much you can consume. Or that just tells you change in standard of living. Right? But what is the change? Percentage. Does that make sense? Okay. But then the issue is, so if you use 2009 as base year, you get one number. If you use 2013 use base year, you sometimes get slightly different growth rate. Okay. And then, so how we are going to dealing with that? So we are going to use a chain rule, $10. Okay. So basically, so what I'm going to do, you're going to calculate the growth rate. Okay. And use different base year. Or say, for example, you have year 1 versus year 2. First, you calculate the growth, use this as the base year. And secondly, use growth as this, sorry, use 2 as base year, calculate another growth rate. Right? So if for example, you have growth rate G1, G2. All right. And then so you say the growth. Let me write that growth rate from 1 to 2 equal to, you just take the average. Does it make sense? But certainly someone use more sophisticated average. So they say, okay, so I'm going to take a square root G1. No, so yeah, it's cannot. So square root is going to be more complex. 1 plus G1, 1 plus G2, minus 1. Right? For some students familiar with this algebra, so you should get that. If not, that's fine. So it's not going to hurt you to understand. So the point here is, depending on which year you use as base, the growth rate may slightly different. And then to resolve that issue, we just take the average. Okay. And then lastly, so in this part, yeah, so we need to, usually we look at GDP per capita. This is the average GDP per person. Why we look at it per capita? It's because the aggregate, the total GDP has a population growth built in. So for example, if nothing changed in terms of per capita, it's just simply because you have more population. Actually, it translates nothing changed in terms of standard living. Right? So that's why we look at per capita. So this per capita means just per person. Right? So we look at per capita GDP. Okay. Usually it is very important. Why is it important? Usually means the more, the merrier. Right? So how do we understand that? Horizontal line is per capita GDP. Actually, here we just convert all different countries' local currency in terms of US dollar. That's easy to compare. Right? Vertical line is percentage of population reporting thriving well-being. If that translates into English, plain English means what? Huh? Rich, not necessary. Yes. Comfortable. You are happy, right? So you are, how to say, you feel good, right? At least something good. Okay, thank you. So by looking at those countries, what kind of statement you can say? So those are like numbers, right? So we just look at these countries, plot them. Overall, do you still see any trend? Yes. Right. So she says the other thing here says basically, so we are comfortable to draw a line. Right? So this says, okay, so the more the merrier, right? So the more dollar we have per capita term in bill, and then usually means we are happier in a very crude way, right? But this is not perfect. It's not perfect in the sense there's outliers. What are outliers? Let's just pick a few. Israel. Income is fairly low among those group of countries. So by the way, so those are considered rich economy, right? Because look at their per capita GDP, right? So if you remember the introduction, so in the world, so we have few billion people live under $2 per day, meaning so their real GDP per capita per year is probably like 500 or 600. Okay. But anyway, so like Israel, like the focus on here, so Israel is very low, but so this number is very high. On the other hand, so United States, we are here, very high number here, but so we are below this line. There is outliers, but in general, higher per capita GDP means better sense, right? So that's kind of explains why we keep track of real GDP, right? And the other example show you the value of real GDP or important real GDP. If we look at Venezuela, if we look at nominal GDP, so this country is growing like crazy, right? But what matter is actually they did not grow much. This is their real GDP. And what explains the gap between these two? Which is a price, right? There was inflation because nominal GDP used the current price and the real GDP used fixed price. And then the gaps, it's just like a balloon. It just inflate the number, right? So that's why we look at real GDP instead of nominal GDP. Okay. All right, so now we are going to look at kind of the last topic in this chapter. To summarize, we have learned how to measure GDP, and then we also differentiate between nominal and real. Now we are going to look at price level. Remember, this is aggregate, not a single item. Okay, this is very important. Just think about in our classroom, or just think about, look at yourself in the households. How many different goods we consume on a daily basis? This can easily exceed thousands, right? If you dare to count. Okay, so we need to look at aggregate price, not a single item. Okay, but what is aggregate price level? Essentially, it's a measuring of overall price in the economy. But then how we are going to measure in overall price? This is a daunting task. Why? Because in our economy, so there are millions of different goods, right? If you go to Target, even like a water bottle, so you can easily just find 10 different brands, right? If you look at a beverage, so there's a whole sections, different beverage, right? How are we going to measure an overall price? And then, so the way to do this daunting task is we are going to design a market basket. What is market basket? So this is a hypothetical or frictional or something we created. A set of consumer purchase of goods and service, meaning we are going to come up with a list of goods and service. Okay, I'm going to explain to you how we come up with that. But first tell you, so once we come up with this list of goods and service, say for example, water, food, shelter, clothing, travel, education, entertainment. All right, so this is a list of goods and plus the quantity. And then, so what are we going to do? We are going to keep track the cost of this basket. By keeping track of these, we get the price level. Right? In the simplest way, say for example, so if you only just care about, if we only care about the gas, and yes, you just look at the gas price. So for example, you consume like 2 gallons per day, and you just keep track the cost of these 2 gallons of gas every month. You get the price index. But certainly this is nonsense, right? So you cannot survive with only 2 gallons of gas, right? And usually maybe you add like eggs, right? Or maybe you add, say for example, I don't know, your mortgage payment or college tuition, right? So that's kind of the idea of what this market basket means. So we will get back later. So now let's look at examples. A simple example to understand how we calculate the price level. So we start with a strange or maybe like fictional economy. So the basket is given by 3 things. Okay, feel free to change to whatever you like. This is for example. Okay. We look at 2-point over time, pre-frost, post-frost. And clearly there's a price change from your microeconomics or from your intuition, from your common sense. You must understand why price change. What caused the price change, by the way? Use your common sense. I'm sorry? No, inflation is upwards, but that's a good guess. Yes, it's inflated, but it just use like a micro level. Why price change? So look at these pre-frost and post-frost. Yeah, it is most events. This is the outcome. So what usually what caused that? The frost. Right? Frost is the cause. But you guys say the same, say more than say the same things. I appreciate for your effort. So the frost is the cause. Why? It's just because of the supply decrease. There's not much fresh fruit after frost comes. Simple, right? Use your common sense. Okay, now what we care here is not frost. What we care is, okay, how these things change the aggregate price. Okay, what are we going to do? We keep track the cost of the basket. This is the basket. The cost of this basket is 200 times this. Actually, I'm going to go to here. 50, 100, right? And then so we end up with 95. That's before frost came. After frost, simple, same basket. Same basket. Same basket. Okay. So now we have two numbers, 95 versus 175. Now we convert these two numbers and then just give to you a sense of what you say like inflation or price change. Right? And this two number give us a quantitative measure of the price change. Okay, so that's how we measure. And mathematical formula, so the price change usually is, so we start with price index. Okay. What is price index? Cost of the market basket in a given year versus cost of the market basket in base year. So essentially just comparing the cost of the market basket at a different year or different time, or you can even compare different weeks. Right? And here we multiply by 100, which is for normalization. We don't like decimals, basically. That's how it is. Okay, just simplify the representation. Right. Now let's look at this example. So the information, the way we extract information is here. So we have the market basket. So maybe it's better to write down here 200, 100, 100. And the question asks you price index of 2011. Before you rush to your calculation, so this information is very important. 2011 is the best year. Actually, so this one you don't need to do any calculation. What is the index for 2011? You don't need any calculation, right? because base year, you look at the price index of base year, it by construction must equal to 100. Does it make sense? Yeah. Okay. So just make sure. So just look at here, right? So basically just the given year is base year, and the base year divided by base year equal 1 times 100. Okay. Now next one. What is the price index of 2012? That's simple, no? So we can do that. So 200, 100, 100. Okay. And then, so what do you need to do? First, find out the cost here, and then use this 200 times this one, 100 times this one, 100 times this one. And for this cost, use 200. They're just trying to do this one, 100. This one, and 100. This one. All right, and then sum them together and find out the number times 100. Is that clear? If it's clear, I'll leave that calculator for you, okay? Is that fine? We good? All right. So as a matter of fact, so this one you can guess, right? The safe bet is D, right? So this cannot be a small number, right? It cannot be 100. Or very low chance of equal to 100. This answer is D. All right, so once we came up with this price index, and then so we are going to calculate inflation. Okay, what is the inflation? Essentially, is the growth rate of price index, or percentage change in price index. But what is price index? It just keep track of the cost of the market basket. What is market basket? It's the goods a hypothetical households consume. Right, so that's a logic, right? So we started with hypothetical households. So essentially, it's a typical American households. That's where it starts. And next, we just look at what they typically consume. Second step. Third, just keep track of the cost of what they typically consume. And the fourth, you calculate the price index. And lastly, we end up with the inflation. So essentially, inflation, it just tells us the cost of the typical American households is facing, right? But certainly here, so we just focus on consumer price index, but we have other index, or we have other inflation, right? So mathematically, so inflation rate is given as follows. We use price index in year 1 minus price index year, 2 minus 1 divided by 1. Again, 100 is for normalization, right? Okay. So I think we have examples. Look at this example. Okay. And for your convenience, so from previous example, we knew, so the price index in 2011 is 100. Price index in 2012 is 103. Okay. And then what's the inflation rate? %, right? So very good. So essentially it's 103 minus 100 divided by 100 times 100, right? Okay. Now let me explain to you, so how we come up with this market basket and what this market basket looks like. Okay. So first, this is how it looks like. So this market basket has many things inside. Housing, remember this is including maybe mortgage, or rent. All right. And then the next big one is food and beverage. Next big one, transportation. But remember, this transportation can be gas, all right, or bus tickets, depending on where you live, or maybe parking. Okay, and then so we have many other things like education. Some students may say, okay, this 6% is too low. But remember, this is typical households. Some households may have students in college, but some don't, right? So we just take the average. Okay. But that's kind of just explain to you so how it come out. So basically, the way they do is they just survey different American households with different background in terms of where they live, in terms of the education, in terms of their income, race, gender, ethnicity, and then take the average. Does that make sense? So if you want to understand, if they try to come up a basket for Omaha, literally means they're going to go to different region of Omaha. All right, not only like a certain part. So that's not going to give you the representation. So they may just send someone to Elko, someone to Papillion, someone to, I don't know, close to Council Bluff, right? So and then so collect them together, take the average, and come up with this number. Is that clear? But now let me throw you a curveball, a hard questions. Do you think it's reasonable to keep this basket the same over time? Answer is definitely no. But why? Certainly they can adjust. But what is the reason they adjust this basket? What do you think? The answer is correct. They are going to adjust. It's not a good idea to keep this the same. But what is the reason? What is the main reason they want to adjust or they need to adjust this basket? Income, yes, certainly play a role. That's very close, and that's yeah. So but can you tell me so how income matters to this basket? So income and other things is going to change the composition, right? So for example, so one thing is very important is like food and beverage. So if you go to extreme comparison, compare United States versus some African country. So United States, like look at here, so like 15%, right, spend on food and beverage. But for a poor country, so this number can easily exceed 50%. But the same happens inside United States. So this is one reason, right? Income and maybe the price change. The other sense. Let's say, for example, motor fuel. This is very common. Now, if we want to ask someone what's the price index in 1900, do you think this motor fuel matters? It even doesn't exist, no? Right? And these days you may be wondering, okay, so when we calculate the price index, we may care about internet. But that seems bad. Does this since exist in 1970? No. Right? So summarize the two reasons. One is income and other related things are going to change the composition. And the second, there are new goods come out. Right. So this is price index. Right? Actually, this is how the price index looks like for the United States. Okay. And then so besides the consumer price index, we also look at producer price index. The difference is the basket is different. Consumer price index is a basket consumed by households. Producer price index is a basket consumed by firms. Like usually they consume raw material. Right, so if you give them copper, coffee bean, right, or oil, or cotton. Right, so that's different. And finally, we also have a GDP deflator. The crude way to understand that is So GDP deflator, we use whatever we produced in that year as a basket. It's the most comprehensive, but certainly has less information. Like, because for the consumer, so why would you care about it? So what do you care is what we consume. For the producer, why would you care? What we care is the cost of input, right? But certainly these three has different purpose. And these three usually keep track with each other, or they are closely correlated, right? So these three looks like, okay. All right. So we finished this part. I mean, this lecture. To summarize what we learned two things. Let me write down. So we learned two things. We learned how to measure in GDP, and we learned how to measure in aggregate price. But in terms of GDP, we look at nominal versus real, right? In the price. So we want to emphasize here, we look at price index. Okay, and then we look at CPI, PPI. Okay, so let's give a different basket. And then we have inflation. Okay, so that's the beginning. So we start to understand macroeconomy. Right. Thank you so much for your attention.